Okay, I want to be honest with you for a second.
Yeah.
I think of myself as a pretty organized person. I pay my bills on time, I keep a calendar. But if you were to unlock my phone right now and look at my Notes app, it is a crime scene.
A crime scene. That
Uh,
sounds a little dramatic.
no, seriously,
Yeah.
it's a disaster zone. It's just this endless scroll of half-baked thoughts. I've got headlines with zero context, links I will never, ever click again, and these cryptic phrases like banana economy.
Banana economy.
Wrote it at 3 in the morning 3 years ago. I have absolutely no idea what it means. And the worst part is whenever I actually have to sit down and write something, a report, a script, even just a tough email, I don't look at any of those notes. I just stare at a blinking cursor and panic.
You and well, pretty much everyone else.
Yeah.
That is the universal anxiety of knowledge work. We call it the tyranny of the blank screen.
That's it.
You feel like you have to summon this bolt of genius out of thin air every single time you sit down to work.
It feels like I'm starting from scratch every single morning. But the book we are diving into today, it claims that this entire struggle, the blank screen, the writer's block, all of it, is completely unnecessary.
That is the big promise. We're looking at How to Take Smart Notes by Sönke Ahrens. And I know, the title sounds a bit like a freshman orientation seminar.
Yeah, you think you're going to get tips on highlighters and color-coded folders.
Right. But this book is really a productivity manifesto disguised as a study guide.
It's arguing for a fundamental shift in your entire workflow. The premise is basically, if you do this right, the writing should almost do itself.
The core argument is that we have the whole relationship between thinking and writing completely backwards.
Backwards how?
Those people think you read, you think really, really hard, and then you write up what you thought. Ahrens says, no, writing isn't the result of thinking. Writing is the medium in which thinking happens.
So if you aren't writing, you aren't really thinking.
Not systematically, no. And to understand why this works, we have to talk about the man who basically proved it. We need to talk about Niklas Luhmann.
Ah, the patron saint of productivity.
Niklas Luhmann was a German sociologist, 20th century. He was the son of a brewer, worked in public administration for a while. But when he finally got into academia, he didn't just publish, he exploded.
The stats on this guy just make me want to take a nap.
They're absurd. They really are. In a 30-year career, he published 58 books and hundreds of articles.
58 books.
And these weren't, fluff pieces. These were dense, classic texts in sociology, organizational theory, politics.
That's 2 books a year, every year, for 3 decades.
Yeah.
Plus the articles. And he didn't have a team of research assistants or anything.
No assistants, no computer for most of that time, just a typewriter and his system. But here's the thing that really irritates people. When someone asked him about his work ethic, Luhmann famously said, I never force myself to do anything I don't feel like. Whenever I am stuck, I do something else.
So you have to call a timeout there. That sounds like, I don't know, typical academic posturing. Oh, I just follow my muse. Come on. If I didn't force myself to work, I would just watch Netflix and eat cereal.
Was he lying? Or is there a catch?
It does sound like a humble brag, but Ahrens argues he was being completely literal. Luhmann structured his work so that he never hit a bottleneck. If he got stuck on one idea, he just moved to another. He could do this because he wasn't relying on willpower or, frankly, a super high IQ. Ahrens notes that once you get north of about 120 IQ, there is zero correlation between intelligence and academic success.
So if it wasn't brains and it wasn't grit, it was the box.
The Zettelkasten, the slip box. Physically, it was just a piece of furniture, wooden drawers filled with thousands of index cards. But Luhmann didn't see it as a storage unit. He called it his dialogue partner.
That's a very specific way to describe a box of paper, a dialogue partner. That implies it talks back. In a way, it did. He said the slip box would surprise him. Because of how he linked the notes, and we'll get to that, the box would generate connections and ideas that he hadn't consciously thought of himself. He wasn't just dumping data into a graveyard. He was building a conversation with his past self.
So unlike my Notes app, which is where ideas go to die, his box was where ideas went to have, well, other ideas.
Precisely. And it brings us right back to that core concept. Writing is thinking.
You mentioned this earlier, and I really want to dig in here.
Yeah.
Because I definitely operate on the think first, write later model. I try to hold the whole argument in my head before I type a single word.
And that is exactly why you stare at the blinking cursor. Our brains are terrible at holding complex structures and working memory. We can hold, maybe 7 items at once. Ahrens talks about Richard Feynman, the Nobel Prize-winning physicist, to show this.
Right, the bongo-playing physicist.
The very same. A historian was in Feynman's office one day looking at his notebooks, and he said something like, This is a wonderful record of your thinking process. And Feynman stopped him and said, no, they aren't a record of my thinking. They are my thinking.
That's a subtle distinction, but it's a huge one. He couldn't do the physics in his head and then just write it down. The physics was happening on the page.
Neuroscientists call it external scaffolding. If you try to build a complex argument just in your head, the whole structure collapses. You have to offload the memory part to the paper so your brain is free to do the actual processing and connecting.
Ahrens uses a metaphor for this that I really liked. He talks about the history of shipping containers.
It's the perfect analogy for the friction we all feel with our notes. Before, 1956, if you wanted to ship goods around the world, it was a total nightmare. You had sacks of flour, crates of furniture, barrels of oil.
Tetris with potato sacks.
Yeah, exactly. And every time you moved from a truck to a ship, you had to unload and reload every single item by hand. It was slow, expensive, and things got lost all the time. This is what most people's note-taking looks like today.
Okay, I feel attacked. But you're right. I have a notebook for meetings, a Google Doc for drafts, the Notes app on my phone, saved articles in my browser. None of it talks to each other.
It's all incompatible data. You can't just easily move a scribble from a book margin into a finished manuscript. There's way too much friction. Then this guy, Malcolm McLean, invents the shipping container, a standard metal box. And suddenly, it doesn't matter what's inside, coffee beans, car parts, whatever. The box is the unit. You can move it from a truck to a ship to a train without ever opening it.
And the slip box is the shipping container for thoughts.
Yes. Luhmann standardized his thinking. Every note was the same size, the same format. This meant he could take an idea from 1965 and just slot it right next to an idea from 1990. It made his entire body of knowledge scalable.
So let's get into the mechanics. How do we actually build this thing? Because I think where people fail, where I fail, is just knowing what's worth writing down in the first place.
And Ahrens is very, very strict about this. He identifies 3 types of notes, and he says mixing them up is fatal to the system. The first type is what he calls fleeting notes.
The napkin scribbles.
Right. You're in a meeting or you're walking the dog and you have a thought. You capture it. But, and this is the critical part, these are temporary. Ahrens says if you don't process them within a day or 2, you should just throw them in the trash.
That seems harsh. Why throw them away?
Because a fleeting note is just a trigger. It's not the actual thought. If you write down banana economy and then you look at it 3 weeks later, the context is gone. The trigger doesn't fire anymore. Keeping it just creates clutter. It's mental hoarding.
Okay, so fleeting notes are the inbox. You process them or you purge them. Then we have literature notes. These are the notes you take while you're actually reading a book or an article.
But again, most people do this all wrong. They just highlight or they copy and paste quotes. Ahrens argues you absolutely must translate the text into your own words.
Why is that translation so important? I mean, if the author said it perfectly, why should I bother rewriting it?
Because copying bypasses understanding. You can copy a quote without actually knowing what it means. Let's do a quick mental simulation. Say you're reading about confirmation bias.
Okay, so a bad note would be just copying the definition. Confirmation bias is the tendency to search for information that supports one's prior beliefs.
Correct. That's passive. A smart note, a proper literature note, would be you translating that into your own reality. You might write something like, this explains why I keep holding on to losing stocks. I'm only reading news that says the price will go back up, and I'm ignoring the stuff that says the company is basically bankrupt.
Oh, I see. So you're not just recording the fact, you're anchoring it to your own experience right away.
Exactly. You are elaborating on it. These notes should be brief, but they need to prove that you actually understood the gist of the idea.
So we have the inbox, which is fleeting notes, the references, which are literature notes. And now we get to the main event, the permanent note.
The permanent note is the shipping container. This is the only thing that goes into the slip box. And the rule is 1 single idea per note, and it must be self-contained.
Self-contained, meaning I don't need the original book to understand it 10 years from now.
Right. If you pull this card out in a decade, it should read like a mini essay. Full sentences, clear grammar. It's not a memory aid, it's an actual piece of writing.
This sounds suspiciously like actual work. You're not just archiving, you're writing the final thing as you go.
That's the entire shift. You aren't taking notes for later. You are writing the first draft of your future work, 1 solid paragraph at a time.
It's weirdly similar to how a chef does prep work. You know, mise en place. When the dinner rush hits, the chef isn't chopping onions. The onions are already chopped. The sauce is already made. They're just assembling the dish.
That is the perfect analogy. Luhmann wasn't cooking from scratch every time he wanted to write a book. He had 30 years of missing place in his drawers. He just had to look in the box and see what ingredients were ready to be combined.
And that combination part, that's the last big step, right? The linking.
Yes. In a normal folder system, you file things top down. You have a folder called Economics, and you just drop the note in there. Lehman worked bottom up. He would take his new note and ask, how does this connect to something that's already in the box?
So he might connect an economics note to, I don't know, a biology note.
If there's a connection, absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's how he built that lattice work of ideas people talk about. He wasn't just retrieving files, he was navigating a web of his own thoughts.
I want to pivot to the psychology of this for a minute, because the system makes logical sense, but Ahrens spends a lot of time on why our brains actually need this. He brings up the Zygarnik effect.
Bluma Zygarnik, a brilliant Soviet psychologist. The story goes, she was sitting in a restaurant in the 1920s and noticed the waiters had these superhuman memories. They could remember incredibly complex orders for huge tables without writing a single thing down.
But there was a catch, right?
The moment the bill was paid, poof, the memory was gone. Zygarnik would ask them what the table had ordered 5 minutes after they left, and the waiters couldn't remember a thing.
So the brain only holds on to a task as long as it's open.
Precisely. It's called an open loop. And unfinished tasks clog up our mental RAM. They create this background hum of anxiety. This is why you wake up at 2 a.m. remembering you forgot to email Bob.
And my Notes app is basically a museum of open loops.
That's why you feel overwhelmed. Ahrens argues that the slip box allows you to close the loop. By writing the permanent note, by converting the thought into a finished physical object, your brain accepts that task as done.
It's like clearing your browser tabs. You free up the RAM so you can actually think about the next thing.
David Allen calls it mind like water. You can't have deep creative thoughts if your brain is frantically trying to juggle a dozen half-remembered ideas.
There's another psychological layer here that I found really interesting. This battle between handwriting and typing.
Yeah.
Ahrens seems to be firmly on team pen and paper.
He is, and there's good data to back it up. There was a famous study where they compared students taking notes by hand versus those typing on laptops. The typists recorded significantly more information. I mean, they practically created a verbatim transcript of the lecture.
Which you'd think is a good thing. More data is always better, right?
You would think so. But when they tested for conceptual understanding, the typists did worse, much worse.
Why?
Because typing is just too fast. You can type without thinking. It becomes this direct line from your ears to your fingers, completely bypassing your brain. But you can't write as fast as someone speaks.
So you're forced to edit.
You're forced to edit, to summarize, to prioritize. You have to ask yourself, what did he actually mean there? That little microsecond of processing is the learning. That's elaboration.
So the inefficiency of handwriting is actually the feature, not the bug.
It forces your brain to engage. If you just copy-paste a digital quote into your system, you haven't done the work. You've just moved pixels around. The slipbox method forces you to do the thinking now, so you have that asset forever.
And that leads to the financial analogy Ahrens uses, which I love, compound interest.
This is maybe the most compelling reason to start. Traditional note-taking is like a piggy bank. You put a coin in, you can take a coin out. It's linear. If you have 100 notes, you have 100 pieces of information.
But the slipbox compounds on itself.
Because of the connections. When you add one new note to a box that already has 500 notes, you aren't just adding one data point. You are potentially creating 5 or 10 or 20 new connections. The more notes you have, the more valuable every single new note becomes.
It's the network effect for ideas.
It is. And this explains why writing got easier for someone like Luhmann as he got older. For most of us, writing gets harder as we accumulate more research because we just get overwhelmed by the mess. For Luhmann, the box did the heavy lifting. He wasn't starting from a blank page. He was surfing on a wave of 30 years of interconnected ideas.
He was harvesting, not hunting.
Exactly.
Okay, but let's be real for a second. We have these bad habits ingrained in us. I am definitely what Ahrens calls the planner.
The planner is the default mode for, I think, most of us. The planner tries to map out the entire project before they even start. You write this perfect outline for a paper. You know, section 1 will be about X, section 2 about Y, and then you go looking for quotes to fill in the blanks.
That sounds responsible. I mean,
Yeah.
That's how I was taught to write in school.
It sounds efficient, but it's a trap. It creates rigidity. If you have a predefined outline, you suffer from confirmation bias. You put blinders on. You only look for facts that fit your plan.
Right, because if I find something that contradicts my outline, it's a problem. It means I have to rewrite the whole thing, so I just pretend I didn't see it.
And you ignore the most interesting parts. Now contract that with the expert. The expert works bottom up. They don't brainstorm into a void. They look into their slip box to see where the clusters are. They see, oh, look at this. I have 50 notes connecting biology to architecture. I never planned that, but that's clearly where the energy is.
So the topic emerges from the work you've already done. You don't have to force it.
Charles Darwin worked this way. He was famous for immediately writing down any observation that contradicted his theories.
Because he knew his own brain would try to delete them to protect his ego.
Exactly. The brain naturally purges disconfirming evidence. The slip box automates honesty. It prioritizes connection over confirmation. If one note contradicts another, you link them. And now you have a debate happening in your box. That is where real insight comes from, not from proving what you already thought, but from seeing where your ideas clash.
It really is about keeping it simple, though. We love to overcomplicate things with fancy tools. There's that old story about the NASA pen.
A classic anecdote, yeah. The story goes that NASA spent millions developing a pen that could write in zero gravity, upside down, in extreme temperatures.
And the Russians just used a pencil.
Now, that story is a bit of a myth. Pencil lead is actually dangerous in zero-G because it can float around, but the principle stands. The slip box is the pencil. It is robust, it is simple, and it focuses on the essential task thinking without getting bogged down in complicated features.
We spend so much time looking for the perfect app notion, obsidian, Rome thinking. The tool is going to do the thinking for us.
You don't need AI tagging or cloud syncing to think clearly. You need a trusted system. You need to stop acting like an archivist and start acting like a writer.
That's the real shift. An archivist asks, where do I file this so I don't lose it?
And a writer asks, in what context will I want to stumble upon this idea again? You're sending a little gift to your future self, a prepackaged thought ready to be used.
It really changes how you view the work of reading.
Yeah.
It's not just consumption anymore.
No. If you consume without processing, it just vanishes. Luhmann said, I only do what is easy.
Right.
And when you have a system like this, the work becomes easy. You are never staring at a blank screen. You are just looking at your notes, seeing what connects, and assembling the pieces.
You're just keeping the conversation going.
That is the goal.
So here's the question I want to leave you with today. If you stopped trying to just remember everything in your leaky bucket of a brain and started building an external dialogue partner today, just one single note a day, how much compound interest would your knowledge have in a year?
And would you ever have to fear the blank screen again?
I suspect not. Thanks for listening to this deep dive. Now go take some smart notes.
See you next time.